Hi, and welcome to One Life Matters, the podcast that reminds you that your life is worth living with purpose, joy, and authenticity. I'm Trish, a counsellor and life coach, and I'll be sharing down to earth conversations, insights, and tools to help you navigate the ups and downs of life. Whether you're healing from the past, finding your confidence, or simply wanting to feel more at peace with yourself, this is your space. Because you only get one life and it truly matters. Just before we get into this episode, I just want to mention that this podcast is for general information, insight, and reflection only. It's not a substitute for personal therapy, counselling, or medical advice. Think back to when you were 10, 12, or maybe 14 years old. What were you worried about? For a lot of kids, the biggest stresses are maths tests, fitting in with the other kids, or what game to play after school. But for some of us, the worries sounded a bit different. Maybe your inner thoughts sounded like, I wonder what mood mum's going to be in when I get home. Or maybe it was, I need to make sure I start cooking dinner before dad gets back from work. If you grew up feeling like you were the secret adult in your house, managing your parents' emotions, diffusing their arguments, or running the household before you're even old enough to drive, I want you to know I totally get it. And there is actually a clinical name for what you experienced. Today, we're going to be discussing something that's a massive light bulb moment for so many people, but isn't really talked about. We're going to be talking about parentification. Now, that sounds like a heavy academic psychological term, right? But the definition is actually very simple. Parentification is like a role reversal. It's what happens when a child is forced to step up and act as the parent to their own parents or to their siblings. In a healthy family dynamic, care flows downward from parent to child. The adult provides the safety, stability, and emotional grounding, while the child gets to be, well, just a child. They get to learn, mess up, and grow. But when parentification happens, that flow gets flipped upside down. The child becomes the caretaker, and in the process, they are partially or sometimes completely stripped of their childhood. They miss out on the freedom of being small because they are too busy carrying the responsibilities of being big. Psychologists generally break this down into two distinct types, and as I go through them, see which one or maybe both resonates with your childhood. Now, I want to pause here for a second because when we hear these definitions, it's easy to think, well, my mum still cooked dinner, or my dad still paid the bills, so this doesn't apply to me. But parentification isn't an all or nothing thing. It exists on a spectrum. And you can experience what we call partial parentification. For instance, like me, you might have had a parent who only handled the cooking, but they were emotionally absent. So to keep the house afloat, you had to step up and do all the housework, listen to all of their heavy adult problems, and constantly play the role of the family peacekeeper. And just saying this gives me a heavy heart because in that scenario, you are living in a bizarre contradiction. Your physical needs are being met, you're provided with a home, and there's food on the table. But your emotional needs are entirely abandoned, and you feel like you need to be an anchor for the family. So if your childhood felt a little bit confusing, a mix of being taken care of physically but carrying the emotional weight of an adult, you're not alone, and I totally get it. Okay, so back to these two types I mentioned. Firstly, let's look at instrumental parentification. And this is the physical, tangible side of running a life. If you experience this, you were given age-inappropriate practical responsibilities. We're talking about cooking the family meals every night, doing all the housework, grocery shopping, managing the bills, translating legal documents for your parents, or basically raising your younger siblings. Essentially, you are an unpaid, underage household manager. The second type is often much more invisible and honestly, it can leave deeper emotional bruises. And this is emotional parentification. This happens when a parent turns to their child for the kind of emotional support they should be getting from another adult, like a partner, a therapist, or a friend. If you were emotionally parentified, you might have been your parents' primary confidant. They told you about their financial anxieties, their marital problems, or their deep insecurities. You became the mediator in family arguments, the therapist who listened to their crying at night, or the peacekeeper who constantly walked on eggshells to keep the household from exploding. In this scenario, your own emotional needs become sidelined because you had to prioritize theirs just to keep the peace. If you're nodding along right now, or if your heart is feeling a little heavy hearing this, stick around because we're going to talk about why this happens and, more importantly, how carrying this heavy armor as a child completely shapes the adult you are today. Now, we need to talk about the why, because when you grow up as a parentified child, it's incredibly easy to carry a lot of internalized anger, or conversely, a mountain of guilt for even feeling resentful. But here's the truth we have to hold today. Understanding why it happened doesn't minimize your pain, but it does help untangle the knot. To do that, we have to normalize the context without necessarily demonizing the parents. In the vast majority of cases, parentification doesn't happen because a parent is evil or malicious. It happens because the system is broken, overwhelmed, or lacking support. It usually stems from a place of deficit, lack, not cruelty. So let's briefly break down the four most common catalysts, starting with addiction and untreated mental illness. The first major driver is parental substance abuse or untreated mental illness. When a parent is battling addiction, severe depression, anxiety, anger, or other mental health issues, their capacity to emotionally or physically show up is really compromised. They are, in a sense, drowning. And when an adult is drowning, the child instinctively becomes the lifeguard. The child steps in to manage the household, maybe shield younger siblings, or even become the emotional anchor for the parent. You learn to read the room before you even learn to read a book. For most parents, they didn't wake up wanting to abandon their role. It's just that their illness hijacked their ability to fill it. The second catalyst is physical illness or disability, and this one carries a unique layer of guilt for the child. If a parent is suffering from a chronic illness, undergoing cancer treatments, or living with a severe physical disability, the physical demands of running a home don't just disappear. When a family doesn't have outside help like supportive relatives or affordable care, the pressure slides down to the children. All the siblings might find themselves having to act like the adults, but it's incredibly common for the oldest or most capable child to bear the brunt of it and step into that gap. You might have been 10 years old, cooking dinner, managing medications, or helping your parent get dressed. In these scenarios, the parent often feels immense guilt for needing the help, and the child feels like they can't complain because, after all, it's not mum or dad's fault they're sick. But remember, it's entirely possible to deeply love a sick parent and still grieve the childhood you lost while caretaking. Next, we'll take a look at structural and financial distress. And this includes divorce or single parent households and a severe lack of community support or acute financial hardship. Consider a single parent who has to work two jobs just to keep the lights on. They aren't home, not because they don't want to be, but because they're surviving. In these high pressure environments, the eldest sibling or the one who is naturally more resilient steps up. They become the one who watches the younger ones, ensures homework gets done, and all too often becomes the parent's late night confidant when the bills are piling up. And this is where emotional parentification often sneaks in. A lonely, stressed parent might treat their teenager like a peer or a partner, venting about finances or adult relationships. It's a lack of boundaries born out of profound isolation. Finally, we have to talk about the invisible thread, and this is known as intergenerational trauma. And that's when parents often repeat what they went through because they simply don't have the blueprint for anything else. As a child, if your parent had to take on adult responsibilities, they may have grown up believing that children contributing to adult labor or emotional support is just how a family functions. To them, it looks like raising a responsible kid. They didn't have the language, the therapy, or the awareness we have today to look at that dynamic and say, wait, this is too much for a child to bear. They passed down the only survival tools they owned. And looking at the whys doesn't for 1 minute suggest you just shrug and say, oh well, no big deal. That's just the way things were. Because it was a big deal. It was incredibly heavy and it changed how you grew up. But seeing the bigger picture helps you separate the hard stuff you went through from the actual people who raised you. And the tricky part about growing up too fast, you don't just magically drop those heavy bricks the day you turn 18. You carry them right into your adult life. And honestly, this is where a lot of us have that light bulb moment. We look at our current struggles and think, why am I like this? Without realizing that our current behavior is just a survival strategy we learned decades ago. Let's break down what this actually looks like in the day-to-day. First up is what I call the hyper-independent, the I'll just do it myself trap. If you had to look after everyone else as a kid because the adults didn't or couldn't, your brain wired itself to believe one core thing. If I don't do it, it won't get done. Fast forward to today, and you're probably a chronic overfunctioner. You take on everything at work, you manage everyone's schedules at home, and you're exhausted. But the hardest part? Asking for help. Or worse, actually accepting help when someone offers it. If someone tries to do something for you, it might even make you feel itchy or anxious because deep down, relying on someone else feels dangerous. Then there's the boundary situation, or rather the total lack of them. When you're parentified, your worth as a child becomes tied to how quiet, helpful, and low maintenance you can be. You learn to read the room like a hawk, anticipating what everyone else needs just to keep the peace. As an adult, that turns into automatic people pleasing. You find yourself saying yes to things before you've even checked if you have the time or the energy. You prioritize everyone else's feelings, comforts, and crises while your own needs get shoved to the absolute bottom of the list. Saying no doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like you're committing a crime. There's a beautiful book by Dr. Lindsay Gibson called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and she talks about how kids adapt to these heavy environments. She writes that we learn to put other people's needs first as the price of admission to a relationship. Just think about that for a second. If you grew up feeling like your only value was what you could do for others, of course you're exhausted today. You've been paying a price of admission that you were never supposed to owe. And do you ever just feel a random heavy blanket of anxiety even when things are going fine? That's the weight of over-responsibility. When you're forced to handle adult problems as a kid, you develop this irrational belief that you're responsible for everything. If a friend is in a bad mood, you assume it's your fault. If a coworker is stressed, you try to fix it. You are constantly carrying the emotional weather of the room on your shoulders, feeling guilty for things that are completely 100% out of your control. It's exhausting to feel like the manager of the universe. And finally, all of this slams right into our adult relationship. It usually goes one of two ways. Either you become the fixer or the parent to your romantic partners. You might find yourself picking people who need to be rescued because being a caretaker is the only way you know how to show love. Or on the flip side, you avoid getting really close to anyone at all. Because to your inner child, closeness and intimacy don't equal safety. They equal a burden. Your brain whispers, if I let this person in, I'm going to have to take care of them too, and I'm already so knackered. If any of this is hitting a bit too close to home, I want you to know you're not broken and you're not doing adulthood wrong. You're just operating on an old software update that was designed to keep you safe in a really tough situation. Okay, so we're going to talk about how we actually start healing. And honestly, the surprisingly cool stuff that comes out of a childhood like this. Because here's the plot twist, growing up too fast didn't just leave you with anxiety, it also gave you some absolute superpowers. Just think about this. Because you had to manage so much so early, you grew up to be incredibly resilient. You're the person people call in a crisis because you don't panic, you handle things. You're naturally organized, you're a reliable leader, and your capacity for empathy is off the charts. You see people and you get them. Those are beautiful, powerful traits. We don't want to throw them away. We just want to stop using them to our own detriment. It's about turning those traits from a mandatory survival reflex into a choice. You can still be the reliable, empathic person you are, but without destroying your own peace to do it. So, how do we actually start putting those heavy bricks down? It's not about overnight transformation. It's about a few gentle shifts in perspective. First, we have to grieve. And I know grief sounds like a heavy word, but you have to allow yourself to be sad for the kid you were. Because it is sad that you didn't get to play or mess up or be taken care of your whole childhood. Acknowledging that it wasn't fair isn't feeling sorry for yourself, it's just being honest. You have to mourn the parts of your childhood you didn't get so you can finally move past it. Second, we start practicing the art of doing nothing. And yes, I called it an art because for people like us, it takes serious practice. If you sit down on the couch for 10 minutes and your brain starts screaming, you should be doing something, you're being lazy, I want you to just notice that voice. Just notice it and then stay on the couch. Learning that your worth isn't tied to how much you do for others is a game changer. And finally, we start building small, tiny boundaries. You don't have to change your whole life tomorrow. Just start with a small no, or even let me think about that and get back to you, instead of an automatic yes. Just give yourself a buffer. The truth is, the situation you grew up in was too big for you, but you survived it. And the adult you are today, you are finally big enough and safe enough to look after that little kid inside you who is still so tired. You get to step down as the manager of the universe now. Thank you so much for being with me today and going to these heavy places. And if this episode hit home, please share it with a friend who you know is also tired of carrying the weight of parentification. Take it easy on yourself this week and do a whole lot of nothing if you can. and I'll catch you in the next episode. Thank you for joining me on One Life Matters. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love you to subscribe and maybe share it with someone who might need it too. And remember, you only get one life, so make it one that truly matters. Until next time, take care of yourself.